I said yes to the wrong man, and almost signed away my entire future to someone who never loved me. If you've ever doubted your instincts, don't. Mine almost cost me everything. Subscribe for more stories like this. It began with a rooftop drenched in candlelight, the city stretching like a glowing sea beneath us, soft music drifting on the wind. It should have been the happiest night of my life. Julian knelt before me, eyes shimmering with what I thought was emotion, not calculation. "Marry me," he said, with a voice as smooth as velvet. I didn't hesitate. I didn't question. I said yes, believing it was love. Believing I was safe. What I didn't know was that Julian had been drowning in debt, that his charming smile masked desperation, and that I was the lifeline he needed to stay afloat. Every kiss, every flower, every whispered promise was a chess move. And I was the queen he needed to corner. In the weeks that followed, I became a bride-to-be. My apartment filled with white fabric swatches, wedding magazines, appointment reminders. Julian played the perfect fiancé. He remembered my latte order, left notes on my pillow, kissed me in front of my friends like we were a fairy tale. I clung to it all, ignoring the red flags as they fluttered at the edge of my vision. One of those red flags came when I mentioned a prenup. It wasn't a serious talk, just something casual, born out of watching a rom-com together. "You think I'm marrying you for your assets?" he laughed. But his eyes didn't. They tightened ever so slightly. I ignored it, brushing it off as an awkward joke. A mistake I'd come to regret. Julian wasn't just charming, he was strategic. We met at a non-profit fundraiser 6 months before the proposal. He swept in like a breeze from a different world. Crisp suit, sharp wit, an effortless way of making people feel like they were the only one in the room. Me. I was a private wealth advisor, not flashy, but successful in my own quiet way. My clients trusted me to protect what they built. I never thought I'd be the one failing to protect myself. As the wedding approached, things began to shift. Julian's questions started to lean toward the financial, too often, too casually. What do you actually keep in your trust? Who's your estate attorney again? Do we need to merge our accounts early so vendors don't get confused? Innocent enough on the surface. But something about his tone, too careful, too polished, unsettled me. And then there was the night of the gala. That night changed everything. It was an exclusive event, all glass walls and city views. Julian worked the room effortlessly while I chatted with a colleague. I excused myself to refresh my drink, weaving through the crowd, and that's when I heard it, 2 men standing just out of sight. One of them said, "He needs this marriage to go through. If he doesn't settle that debt soon, he's finished." I froze. Finished? Debt? I peered around the pillar. One of the men was Julian's old friend Damien, a hedge fund type I'd met briefly before. The other man I didn't recognize. Julian wasn't speaking, but he was there. Listening. Nodding. Tense. That was the moment I felt the first crack in the story he had written for me. I didn't confront him. I wanted to. I wanted to scream right there in my gown and heels with champagne in hand. But I didn't. I needed facts. Proof. Because what if I was wrong? What if love just looked different when it came under pressure? Back home, Julian pretended nothing was wrong. He kissed me like he always did, held me as we fell asleep. But I was awake. Eyes open. Brain ticking. Then came the moment I wish I could forget. He was in the shower, and I saw it, his laptop screen lighting up with a preview of an email. Finalizing everything. Once the papers are signed, her assets transfer automatically. I stood frozen. Her assets. Transfer. Automatically. The words branded themselves in my mind. My pulse roared in my ears. My skin went cold. I opened the laptop. My hands shook. There it was, email after email with a lawyer I'd never met. My name. My trust. Details only Julian would know. The entire strategy mapped out. He was planning to legally tie my financial future to his the moment I said, "I do," and then vanish into the safety of my money. I wanted to throw the laptop. I wanted to scream. But instead, I took screenshots. Every email. Every attachment. Every plan. Because if Julian was playing a long game, so was I. And mine had just begun. The water stopped. I slammed the laptop shut, slid it back into place, and sat on the couch with my phone like nothing had happened. He came out, towel around his waist, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "Miss me?" I smiled. But in my head, I wasn't the bride anymore. I was the storm. And the wedding. It would be the stage. The next morning, I watched him pour my coffee. The same way he always did, perfect cream-to-sugar ratio, a kiss on the cheek, the warm smile of a man who believed he had me entirely fooled. My hands wrapped around the cup to hide the shaking. I thanked him softly, took a sip, and pretended it still tasted sweet. But everything had changed. I carried his secret like a ghost sitting beside me, whispering truths between every moment we shared. I smiled through cake tastings. I laughed at his jokes during our final vendor meetings. I even posted a picture of us holding hands with the caption, "1 week to forever." The likes rolled in. My friends commented how lucky I was. How happy I looked. They didn't know I was preparing for war. Every night, I stayed awake long after Julian fell asleep. His breathing slow and even beside me while my mind raced through every angle, every risk. I scoured financial records, cross-referenced timelines, reached out to my firm's legal team under the guise of a client concern. Quietly, surgically, I confirmed everything. Julian had defaulted on a $500,000 investment from a private backer, an investor with ties to the New York finance world. A man known for being generous with opportunity and ruthless with retribution. Julian promised returns he couldn't deliver, then disappeared. The only way out now was through me. Through my money. Through my name. Through the vows I almost believed in. What struck me wasn't just the betrayal. It was the precision. He knew the exact legal loopholes to exploit once we were married. He wasn't marrying me and then planning to ask for help. No. He was marrying me because that help would be automatic. I wasn't a partner. I was a plan. One night, as he showered again, I stared at myself in the mirror. Makeup half wiped, the neckline of my robe slipping off one shoulder. I looked tired. Older. Not because of age, but because of truth. Because I could finally see the lie for what it was, and how willingly I had walked toward it. I whispered aloud, just to hear my own voice, "You thought I wouldn't find out." The mirror didn't answer. But I did. I knew what I had to do. Julian had built his con on 3 pillars: timing, secrecy, and public image. He needed the wedding to go off without suspicion. He needed me quiet. And he needed people to believe in his narrative: devoted fiancé, brilliant entrepreneur, perfect match. So I gave him what he wanted. I played the role down to the smallest detail. I gushed about our honeymoon plans. I let him take pictures of me in my gown at the final fitting. I texted him sweet nothings and let him hold my hand tighter when we met his parents for brunch. He smiled more those days. I think he believed he had already won. And I think that's what made it easier for me to keep going. But even the best games require allies. So I made a call. To the man whose name I found in Julian's email thread, the one he owed. The one he thought he could avoid. His name was Charles Danforth, a venture capitalist with a reputation that whispered through boardrooms like a warning. I had seen pictures of him on Forbes. Salt and pepper hair, always in navy, never smiling. I called his office and left a message. To my surprise, he called back the next day. Himself. "This is Danforth," he said, his voice low and direct. I hesitated, heart pounding. "Mr. Danforth, I believe you've been trying to locate Julian Blackwell." Silence. Then, "Who is this?" "My name is Eva Kendrick," I replied. "I'm his fiancée. And I think we have mutual interests." Another pause. But this time, not because of confusion. Curiosity. "Go on," he said. I laid it out in clean lines. I told him what I'd found, what Julian was planning, and how soon it would happen. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't beg. I just told the truth. When I finished, Charles Danforth said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, with a voice colder than steel, he said, he really thought he'd outrun me. I waited. Then he added, "I'll be in touch." "But Miss Kendrick." "Yes. If you're serious about exposing him, don't hesitate." The call ended. That night, Julian wrapped me in his arms as we lay in bed. He whispered about beach resorts and private jets and how perfect our life would be. I smiled. I nodded. I kissed him back. And I imagined the moment his world would collapse beneath his feet. Because now, I wasn't alone. I had leverage. I had timing. I had someone far more powerful than Julian waiting for the right moment. The wedding was 5 days away. And I had just turned it into a trap. There's something haunting about watching a dream die in real time. Not your dream, but someone else's. Especially when that someone still believes everything is going their way. Julian stood behind me, adjusting the delicate straps of my gown in the mirror. His fingers grazed my shoulders as he whispered, "You're going to stop every heart in that room." I smiled. And thought, "Except yours." The gown was beautiful, every silk with hand-sewn beading along the bodice, flowing into a skirt that shimmered like water in motion. I had chosen it before the lies unraveled. Before I knew I'd wear it not to promise forever, but to finish what he started. The tailor called it, "a dress that owns the room." I was about to prove her right. With only 3 days left, the pace of the wedding whirlwind picked up. Calls, catering confirmations, seating charts. Julian dove into every detail with the energy of a man about to secure his future. He clinked glasses with vendors, shared excited updates with his parents, and even recorded a pre-wedding vlog for memories. If he noticed that I'd grown quieter, he didn't mention it. That's the thing about narcissists, they mistake your silence for surrender. But mine was preparation. Charles Danforth called again that night. "I've sent over the documents," he said. "Legal notice, debt claims, full paper trail. Your fiancé's empire is one signature away from collapse." I opened the files on my laptop. Every number lined up. Every shady transaction backed by proof. Charles had done his homework. "I want to serve him publicly," I said. "You sure?" he asked. "Most people would want to disappear quietly." "I don't want him to disappear," I replied. "I want him to watch." There was a brief pause. Then, for the first time, Charles chuckled. "I'll be there." I ended the call, closed my laptop, and stared at my reflection. My engagement ring glinted under the lamplight, mocking me. The very thing that had once made my heart race now felt like a shackle. But I wasn't ready to take it off. Not yet. The next day, I played my part again. I met Julian's mother for tea, listening to her gush about flower arrangements and color palettes. She called him the best thing that ever happened to me. I sipped my chamomile, nodding at all the right moments, while inside, a different truth pulsed with every heartbeat. That night, Julian brought out a bottle of wine he had been saving for a moment that mattered. He poured us each a glass, raised his to mine, and said, "To our new life. To trust." The word almost made me choke. But I lifted my glass and smiled. "To trust," I echoed. It tasted like rusted metal. We talked about our honeymoon, or rather, he did. He had already chosen the resort, the suite, the excursions. "You won't have to lift a finger," he promised. "You'll be taken care of." Taken care of. That was what he called it. He didn't see the rage flicker in my eyes because I had mastered the art of blinking it away. Later that night, I sent one final email, to an old contact of mine, a journalist who specialized in high-profile finance scandals. Just a tip. Anonymous. But enough to spark interest. Enough to ensure that when the time came, eyes would be watching. Because I wasn't just planning justice. I was planning legacy. 2 days left. The venue sent over the final layout. It was breathtaking. A lakeside estate with marble steps, a floral arch, golden chairs arranged in perfect symmetry. The kind of wedding you see in magazines. The kind of wedding you dream about since childhood. Funny how mine would end in ruin. But not for me. Julian was out that afternoon. He left in a rush, said he had a few things to tie up. I knew what he meant. Probably scrambling to get final signatures on the shell company he created for the post-marriage transfers. He thought I hadn't noticed the encrypted files on his drive. Or the hush-hush meetings logged in his calendar. He still believed I was in the dark. So I used the time. I went into his office, opened the locked drawer he thought I didn't know about, and took everything. Copies of our marriage license, draft agreements he'd had altered, a fake document assigning power of attorney to himself, dated 2 days after the wedding. Each page was a confession. I scanned and uploaded it all. Sent a copy to my lawyer. Another to Charles. And one final copy to myself, stored in an encrypted folder labeled Vows. Julian returned hours later, flushed and breathless, with a bouquet of my favorite lilies in hand. "For my almost wife," he said. I hugged him. And silently counted the hours until he would no longer be my anything. That night, he pulled me close in bed, fingers brushing my cheek. "Are you nervous?" he whispered. I turned to face him. "No," I said softly. And I wasn't. Because tomorrow, I'd walk into that ceremony with more than a gown and a smile. I'd walk in holding a secret. And he'd never see it coming. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous about walking down the aisle. But because I knew I was walking into battle. Julian lay beside me, his arm draped over my waist, breathing deeply, peacefully. He looked like every woman's dream, a handsome, successful man, utterly in love. Except it was a mask. A lie. And tomorrow, the world would watch it fall apart. I slipped out of bed quietly, the silk hem of my robe whispering against the floor. In the living room, I opened my laptop one final time. The files were all there, clearly labeled, organized by date and subject. Fraudulent agreements. Messages proving premeditation. Bank transfers. Screenshots of his emails to the lawyer who had helped him engineer it all. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the foundation I had built beneath my rage. I opened a secure folder I'd shared with Charles. There it was, an annotated timeline of Julian's scam. The legal notices were prepped. The investor claims signed. The breach documentation locked and ready to go. I'd done my part. All that remained was the stage. Charles had been clear. Once I serve him, we need eyes. Witnesses. Publicity. And I agreed. This wasn't just about ruining Julian financially. It was about stripping him of the persona he built from manipulation and charm. He wanted to own my legacy. Instead, I was about to write his. I closed the laptop and stood at the window, watching the city lights ripple across glass towers. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping peacefully. Laughing with their partners. Dreaming of futures that weren't built on lies. I had wanted that once. But now I wanted something else. Freedom. Behind me, Julian stirred. Babe. His voice was thick with sleep. Come back to bed. I'm just getting water, I whispered. Go back to sleep. He mumbled something and turned over. I waited until his breathing deepened again before I moved. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were steady now. No more trembling. No more second-guessing. What had started as heartbreak had evolved into something clearer. Sharper. A kind of resolve I never knew I was capable of. Tomorrow was our wedding day. And I was going to bury everything he thought he built. I stood in front of the mirror again before heading back to bed. My reflection looked unchanged. Same eyes, same hair, same skin. But I wasn't her anymore. Not the woman who said yes without hesitation. Not the woman who mistook attention for affection. I was someone he didn't know yet. I returned to bed and lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. Julian curled closer in his sleep, muttering my name with a softness that made my skin crawl. The hypocrisy of it was almost laughable. He had practiced this. The intimacy, the timing, the illusion of safety. He had rehearsed it all like lines in a play. And I was about to end the performance. The sun rose slowly the next morning, washing the bedroom in gold. Julian opened his eyes, stretched, and kissed my shoulder. Ready to be mine forever. I smiled without turning. More ready than ever. He got up humming, grabbing his phone, texting vendors, checking in with his best man. The day unfolded exactly as he planned. Hair. Makeup. Final dress delivery. Chauffeur schedules. But behind it all, I could feel the cracks spreading. My phone vibrated. One message from Charles. We're in position. You give the signal. My breath caught, but not from fear. From the surge of something that tasted like justice. I arrived at the venue 2 hours early. The estate grounds were breathtaking, Crystal Lake reflecting the pale sky, marble steps cascading from the ceremony platform, flowers in perfect symmetry. Julian had spared no expense. Not because he loved me. But because this wedding was his brand. The staff buzzed around me. Stylists curling my hair. The planner whispering about rain contingency. Bridesmaids fussing with ribbon. No one knew what was coming. The makeup artist leaned in, adjusting my lip color. You look stunning, she whispered. Like a queen. I nodded. That's exactly how I feel. As I sat there, surrounded by mirrors and chatter, a strange calm washed over me. Julian believed this was his day. That he had one. That in a matter of hours, everything he wanted would fall into place. Instead, it was going to fall apart. I pulled the ring box from my bag and stared at it. The diamonds sparkled under the dressing room lights. I ran my thumb along the edge and whispered, "You never deserved this." Then I placed it in the side pocket of my gown, ready for one final act. The music began to swell outside. Guests were seated. Cameras positioned. Julian stood at the altar, back straight, smile picture perfect. He had no idea. I took one last breath and stepped out of the room. The aisle stretched before me like a path to judgment. And I wasn't walking toward a promise. I was walking toward a reckoning. Every eye turned toward me. The music rose, delicate strings floating through the summer air as I stepped onto the white aisle. Cameras flashed. Guests stood. The sun caught the veil cascading behind me like a waterfall of light. But all I could see was him. Julian. Standing at the altar, hands clasped, smile wide, too wide. His eyes shimmered with pride, with triumph. He thought he had won. That in minutes, he'd be married, rich, and untouchable. And I was supposed to be the final piece. He didn't blink as I walked toward him. His gaze locked onto mine. To everyone else, we must have looked like a fairy tale. The radiant bride. The devoted groom. A picture of perfection. But beneath my calm expression, I counted the beats of my heart like a war drum. 10 steps. 9. 8. My hand brushed the hidden pocket in my gown. The ring box was there. The papers Charles had prepared were waiting just behind the arch. And Charles himself. Already among the guests. I reached the altar. Julian stepped forward, gently taking my hand. He leaned close, whispering, "You're breathtaking." I smiled. "So are you," I replied. The officiant began to speak, but I barely heard a word. My pulse was too loud. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine and lake water. Behind the crowd, birds chirped like nothing extraordinary was about to unfold. The officiant cleared his throat again. "Before we begin, does anyone object?" "I do." The words were mine. Not shouted. Not dramatic. But sharp enough to silence the wind. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Julian turned, confused. His hand tightened around mine. "Eva," he whispered, a shadow of panic already creeping into his voice. I let go of his hand. "I'm sorry," I said, loud enough for every guest to hear. "There's someone else who needs to speak first." I turned toward the crowd. And there he was. Charles Danforth. Walking down the aisle with calm, deliberate steps. He wore a steel gray suit and a look that could curdle milk. Guests murmured. Some recognized him. Others just sensed the shift in the air. Julian paled. "Charles," he hissed under his breath. The officiant looked between us, clearly rattled. "Miss Kendrick, what is this?" Julian stepped forward. "Eva, what are you doing?" "I'm making sure everyone knows the truth," I said. Charles stopped a few feet from the altar, pulling a folded stack of documents from his coat. "I believe this man owes me $500,000, he said, voice ringing like a bell across the stunned crowd. Whispers turned into gasps. Julian's parents sat stiffly in the front row, stunned into silence. I invested in him. Trusted him. He disappeared, Charles continued. But recently, I was informed of his creative solution. He looked at me, eyes gleaming. Marrying into wealth. Julian took a step toward him. "You have no right." "I have every right," Charles cut in. "And your bride-to-be has made sure I have every document I need." The projector came to life behind us. Images flashed on the screen meant for wedding photos, only now it showed email threads, signed agreements, and Julian's digital footprints. One message stood out, larger than the rest. "Once I marry her, I'll have full access. 1 year, and I'm gone." The crowd collectively gasped. Julian turned to me, his voice strangled. "You went through my..." "I protected what's mine," I interrupted coldly. "You don't understand." "I understand everything," I said. He reached for me, but I stepped back. No more lies. No more performances. Charles handed the documents to a man standing just off the platform, an official court courier, ready and waiting. "You've just been served," Charles said. Julian stood frozen. All eyes were on him. The golden boy, the charming genius, the groom, revealed as a liar, a thief, a fraud. He looked out at the crowd. His parents. His friends. His investors. Everyone he needed to keep his house of cards intact. And every one of them now saw it crumble. "I can explain," he tried. "No," I said. Then I pulled the ring from my pocket and held it between two fingers. "This was never yours." And I dropped it. The sound of it hitting the marble echoed louder than any music could. Julian flinched like he'd been slapped. I turned toward the guests. "You deserve to know who you're celebrating. So now you do." Then, calm as ever, I stepped down from the altar and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked. Because I wasn't escaping a wedding. I was reclaiming my life. Behind me, Julian called my name. Once. Twice. Then silence. I never turned around. But I did smile. Because the next chapter wasn't his. It was mine. I didn't need to look back to know what was happening behind me. The whispers were turning into conversations. Guests rising from their seats. Cameras still rolling. Julian, still standing at the altar, frantically scanning the crowd for someone, anyone, who still believed in him. But there was no one left. The silence that followed my exit felt sacred. Like the first breath after coming up from underwater. I walked past the gold-trimmed archways, past the stunned floral designer frozen mid-adjustment, past the servers holding silver trays of champagne that would never be toasted. A black car waited at the edge of the gravel path. The back door opened before I even reached it. Charles Danforth sat inside. No longer the enemy of my enemy. Now my witness. He said nothing as I climbed in beside him. Just handed me a glass of still water, which I accepted with hands that, finally, didn't shake. "Impressive delivery," he said eventually, eyes still on the venue. He never saw it coming. I looked straight ahead. That was the point. He studied me for a moment. Most people would have walked away quietly. Let the courts do the work. "I don't do quiet," I replied. "Not anymore." The car pulled forward, easing away from the wreckage of what was supposed to be the biggest day of Julian Blackwell's life. My veil fluttered behind me as the wind pulled it loose. I didn't bother to fix it. Let it fall. Let all of it fall. Charles pulled out his phone and began typing. "The legal team has filed the papers. His accounts are frozen as of 10 minutes ago." "What about the investors?" "Already pulling out," he said. "His remaining partners are furious. Most of them only stayed because of his engagement to you. You gave him legitimacy." The words made my jaw clench. I had been his shield. His bait. His redemption arc. But not anymore. "What happens now?" I asked, though I already knew. "Now?" Charles leaned back in his seat. "He spends the next year drowning in lawsuits. Trying to claw back credibility. Failing." I nodded. "Good." As the city skyline came back into view, my phone buzzed. Once. Then again. Then 10 more times. Julian. Voicemail. Text messages. Missed calls. And then, videos. The footage from the wedding had already leaked. The emails. The ring drop. The moment Julian realized the truth. My social media was flooded. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Strangers tagging me. Some asked if it was staged. Others just said, respect. I turned the phone off and dropped it in my bag. It wasn't about the attention. It was about the consequence. Julian had once told me that appearances mattered more than anything. He was right. And now, he was nothing but appearances, and none of them flattering. Back at my apartment, the building doorman gave me a confused look as I stepped out in full wedding attire alone. I gave a small nod, not breaking stride. The elevator ride up was quiet. My reflection in the mirrored wall stared back at me with a strange new clarity. I wasn't humiliated. I wasn't broken. I was rebuilt. I stepped into my apartment and locked the door behind me. The first thing I did was take off the dress. I didn't fold it. I didn't hang it. I let it fall in a pool at my feet and stepped over it. I walked barefoot to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of wine, and stood in the middle of my apartment, the same one Julian had once called too small for someone like you. It felt enormous now. My laptop sat on the counter. I opened it, logged into my encrypted folder, and added one final document, a termination letter. Not for Julian, but for the nonprofit board I had chaired for the last 4 years. I was done being polite. Done being safe. The truth was, I had spent years shrinking myself into a box that looked good from the outside. And it took a liar trying to steal my life for me to finally see the cage. I wasn't going to play small anymore. Julian thought he was marrying into a legacy. But I was just getting started. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Finance darling exposed at own wedding. Investor reveals groom's multi-million-dollar scam. Would-be bride turns ceremony into courtroom. Photos of me at the altar, hand in the air, ring mid-air, splashed across every finance and gossip site alike. Even Julian's company website had been pulled offline. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the way he smiled the night he proposed. The way he kissed me after sealing contracts I didn't know existed. The way he made me feel crazy when I asked innocent questions about my own assets. No. He deserved this. All of it. I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window, the sunlight warm on my bare feet. Somewhere across the city, Julian was probably making desperate phone calls. Trying to recover from the very thing he thought would save him. Me. Too late. Because for the first time in years, I belonged to no one. Not to a ring. Not to an illusion. Not to him. And tomorrow, I'd start writing the story that was supposed to be mine all along. The strange thing about public humiliation is how quickly it turns. For Julian, it happened in hours. By mid-morning, 3 of his corporate partners had cut ties. His publicist quit. His assistant deleted her bio from LinkedIn. His parents, once proud champions of his charm, issued a quiet statement asking for privacy. Not support. Not defense. Just distance. By noon, he released a shaky, carefully worded apology video. Filmed in his condo, pale curtains drawn, his voice rough with forced contrition. I was under financial pressure. I made mistakes. I never meant to hurt Eva. The comments were brutal. You didn't make a mistake. You made a plan. She saved herself. You didn't deserve her. Marry for money, lose everything. I didn't watch the whole thing. I didn't need to. Because the day wasn't about him anymore. It was about what I was going to do next. I sat at my kitchen counter with a fresh journal and a black pen. I hadn't written like this in years. Freely, without filter. The first page simply said, "This is where I begin." Then I made a list. Not of people to punish. But of things I had put off. Ideas I'd buried under his ambition. Dreams I'd called unrealistic because he didn't approve. By page 3, the fog that had clung to me for months, maybe years, finally started to lift. And then came the call. Not from Charles. Not from a friend. From someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. A woman named Mira Lynn. She was the editor of a financial publication I used to freelance for, back before Julian convinced me to stop wasting time on side projects. Eva, she said, I don't know if you've seen the news. I have. She hesitated. Then you probably know you've become something of a folk hero. I laughed. Not bitterly. Not angrily. Just clean and light. Folk hero. I repeated. The wedding video's viral. Everyone from Buzz Today to Market Mirror wants an interview. I was quiet for a moment. Then asked, and you? I want your words, she said. Not your drama. Your insight. Your story, on your terms. It was the first real offer I'd gotten in months that didn't feel like someone trying to get something from me, but with me. I agreed. And just like that, the woman who had nearly been reduced to a transaction became a storyteller. That night, I wrote for hours. About love. About illusion. About how sometimes the worst betrayal is the one that makes you see yourself clearly. I didn't write his name. Not once. Because I wasn't going to let him steal space in my future. The next morning, the piece ran online under the title, What I Wore to the Wedding I Refused to Finish. It trended within hours. Not because it was juicy. But because it was honest. Women sent messages from around the world. Some were engaged. Some divorced. Some still clawing their way out of financial traps disguised as relationships. One wrote, I was about to sign a loan for my fiancé. Then I read your story. I paused. I realized then, revenge isn't just about taking someone down. Sometimes it's about lifting someone else up. Julian. He faded fast. The media hounded him for a few days. Then someone else made a scene at a different wedding. The cycle moved on. But my name. My voice. They stayed. Mira offered me a column. Not on scandal. On survival. On rebuilding. On money, power, and choosing yourself when it's the hardest thing to do. I said yes. 1 month after the non-wedding, I stood in front of a quiet crowd at a local event, a women's finance summit, and told my story aloud for the first time. No script. No slideshow. Just me and a microphone. The room was silent when I finished. And then, a standing ovation. I walked off that stage lighter than I'd ever felt. Not because I had won. But because I had stopped losing. Later, as I packed up my notes, a woman approached. Early 30s. Nervous. Eyes full of something fragile. She leaned in and whispered, How did you know? When to walk away? I smiled. I didn't, I said. I just finally stopped talking myself into staying. She nodded. Tears pooled, but didn't fall. That moment meant more than all the headlines combined. Because it proved what Julian never understood. You can take someone's time, their money, their trust, but you cannot take their voice unless they give it to you. And I was done giving mine away. Back home that night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and no plans. The stars were out. The city pulsed. And for the first time in a long, long time, there was no performance. No pretending. Just Eva Kendrick. Whole. Untethered. And finally, unbreakable. It arrived in the middle of an ordinary Wednesday. I had just wrapped up a podcast interview on emotional financial abuse, still sitting in the studio's small green room, sipping tea that had long gone cold. My phone buzzed. Blocked number. Voicemail only. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was a spam call or maybe a reaction to the latest article I'd published. But then I saw the transcribed preview. Eva, I don't even know where to start. And my stomach turned. I played the message. It was Julian. His voice, strained, slower, thinner than I remembered. Eva, if you're hearing this, it means I finally got through. I know I have no right to call. I know what I did, what I tried to do, was unforgivable. But I need to talk to you. Just once. Please. He paused. You were never supposed to find out like that. Another pause. Then something strange, like a soft laugh, or maybe a breath held too long. I underestimated you. I always did. I thought you'd walk away quietly. You didn't. You set fire to everything I built. And maybe I deserve that. But please. I need to see you. Just once. Click. The message ended. I stared at the phone, heart steady. Not racing. Not panicked. Just, clear. He still didn't get it. This wasn't about how I found out. It was about what he planned. The lie wasn't the mistake. The lie was the foundation. Still, I didn't delete the message. Not right away. Instead, I forwarded it to Charles. 5 minutes later, he replied with a single line. He's trying to rattle you. Don't let him. But I wasn't rattled. I was curious. Not about him, but about me. Would the woman who once loved Julian be tempted to go back? Would she feel compassion? Pity? I needed to know. So I agreed to meet him. At a public cafe. Middle of the day. Open space. Clear exits. No second chances. Just closure. He arrived late. Of course he did. His hair was longer now, unkempt. Eyes sunken. Suit wrinkled, like it had once been expensive but now slept on a couch. He spotted me instantly, hesitated near the door, then crossed the floor slowly. Eva, he said, as if tasting the word for the first time. I didn't rise. I didn't smile. Sit. He did. I know you don't owe me anything, he started. But thank you for. I'm not here for your thank you, I cut in. You said you wanted to talk. So talk. He looked down at his hands. Thin. Trembling. I've lost everything. I know. The lawsuits, he shook his head. My name's poison now. No one will touch me. That's what happens when people find out who you are, I said flatly. His eyes searched mine. For sympathy. For softness. There was none left. I don't expect forgiveness, he said finally. I think about us. All the time. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. There was no us. There was your plan. Your debt. Your desperation. He didn't deny it. That surprised me. You were supposed to save me, he whispered. And for the first time since that rooftop proposal, I felt something real. Not sadness. Not rage. Pity. But not for him. For the girl I used to be. The one who might have taken that as a compliment. I stood. He looked up, startled. That's it? He asked. I didn't come for closure, I said. I already had that. I came to make sure I never doubted myself again. He blinked. I picked up my bag. You were never going to win, Julian. Not because I outsmarted you, but because I outgrew you. I walked out without another word. And this time, I didn't look back. Not even once. Later that night, I sat on my balcony, the city humming below. I poured a glass of wine and opened a new draft of my next column. The title: What You Learn When They Try to Destroy You. I smiled as the words came easily. Line after line. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally free of the need to be understood. Somewhere, Julian would spin his own story. But mine would be heard. And this time, it would be entirely mine to tell. It's strange how fast the world moves on. A month ago, Julian Blackwell was the golden boy of boutique venture capital. Polished. Charismatic. A man whose reputation got him through doors before his credentials did. Now, he was a cautionary tale. Someone whispered about in finance lounges and quietly removed from networking databases. The kind of man people now referred to in past tense, even though he was still very much alive. And me? I was still standing. Still writing. Still building. But now, ***. My column had gone viral 3 times in 2 weeks. Not because I was chasing drama, but because I was writing the one thing no one else was daring to write. That power, real power, doesn't come from how much you earn or who you marry. It comes from walking away when staying would be easier. It comes from saying, this doesn't work for me anymore, and meaning it, even when it costs you everything. The publisher offered me a book deal. My old firm, the one I had quietly resigned from after Julian's influence poisoned my judgment, called me to offer a consulting position, on my terms. Even Mira, who had once admitted she thought I was too refined to cause a stir, invited me to co-host a podcast focused on financial independence and identity. It was poetic. He tried to rob me of autonomy. And I had become a voice for women rediscovering theirs. But something still lingered. Not fear. Not anger. A memory. Of that girl on the rooftop. The one who wore silk and hope. Who said yes too quickly. Who wanted love to be enough. I needed to say goodbye to her. So I went back. To the rooftop where it had all begun. The restaurant was still open. Still glowing with fairy lights and overpriced champagne. Still setting the stage for others to make promises they may or may not keep. I requested the same table. It overlooked the skyline, just as it had that night. Only now, it looked different. Smaller. Less magical. More real. The waiter greeted me warmly, handed me the same leather-bound menu. Celebrating anything special tonight? I smiled. Yes, I said. Myself. I didn't order much. Just a glass of wine and the dessert I remembered from that night, the crème brûlée Julian had called decadent. I let the quiet surround me. No phones. No cameras. No audience. Just me. And then I pulled out my notebook. The leather one I'd started after the wedding that never was. I flipped to a blank page and wrote a single line. This chapter is mine. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need the headlines. Because the real win was that I still had myself. Untouched. Uncorrupted. Unbroken. The check came with a complimentary chocolate. I paid in cash. No drama. No flair. Just peace. And as I stepped back into the city, my heels clicking against the pavement, I felt the strangest thing. Gratitude. Not for Julian. But for the fall. Because without it, I might have stayed asleep in a dream that was never mine. I might have spent years giving my brilliance to a man who only saw it as currency. Instead, I woke up. And now I was building something real. Not with vengeance. With vision. That night, I recorded a voice memo. Something raw. Personal. For the podcast. I wasn't sure I'd publish it yet, but I needed to say it out loud. I used to think survival meant getting through the betrayal. The exposure. The public spectacle. But survival is the wrong word. I didn't survive him. I surpassed him. I paused. And then added, he tried to make me quiet. He only made me louder. The next morning, I posted it with the caption. Not an ending. A reintroduction. It reached over 100,000 listens in 48 hours. I received messages from women in 3 continents. Some in tears. Some in fire. All of them finding pieces of themselves in the ruins I had refused to live in. Julian didn't respond. Not directly. But I saw the blog post he published anonymously through one of his former media contacts. A tired, self-justifying piece called When Ambition Breaks You. He never mentioned my name. But the world knew. And they didn't care about his side anymore. Because I wasn't just a woman wronged. I was a woman rewritten. And I had no intention of letting anyone hold the pen ever again. 6 months later, I stood behind a podium at a global women's leadership summit. The lights were bright, the stage large, but the room was silent. Waiting. They weren't here because of the scandal. Not anymore. They were here because of the story that came after. Mine. I adjusted the mic, took a slow breath, and smiled. I'm not going to tell you how to leave him. Or how to expose him. Or how to deliver a perfect takedown in a white dress. You've already heard that story. You've seen the viral clips. You've read the headlines. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I leaned forward slightly. What I want to talk about today is what happens after you reclaim your power. Because that's what no one prepares you for. The quiet. The rebuilding. The soft ache of realizing you spent years pouring yourself into someone who only saw you as a bridge to something else. What do you do once you're no longer his? You learn how to be yours. That's what I told them that day. That healing doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like saying no without explaining yourself. Sometimes it looks like starting your own business with the money you once thought would buy a shared future. Sometimes it's waking up in a quiet apartment with a full calendar and realizing you're not lonely. You're free. When the speech ended, the applause was thunderous. Not because I had dragged a man through the mud. But because I had walked through fire and emerged with something far more important than a win. I had emerged with me. After the summit, I stayed behind in the empty auditorium, just breathing it in. The lights were still warm, the seats quiet. I remembered the girl who had once spent hours organizing floral budgets for a wedding that would never be. And I thought, thank you. Not to Julian. But to the girl who didn't give up when everything fell apart. The girl who gathered the pieces, examined them carefully, and said, let's build something better. That night, Charles called. We still kept in touch, not often, but enough. He had moved on, invested in a new firm, and occasionally sent news articles he thought I might enjoy. You did it, he said without preamble. No, I replied. I'm doing it. He laughed. You know, I was wrong about you. Only once. I teased. I thought you were smart, he said. But I didn't know you were brilliant, ruthless in the best way. I'm not ruthless, I said. I'm just done apologizing for taking up space. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, looking out at the skyline. Same city. Same skyline. But everything had changed. My name was now associated with truth, resilience, clarity. His. With betrayal. We hadn't spoken since that one final coffee. I had blocked his number. Ignored his online shadows. Removed his access to any version of my life. But I had heard whispers. He was bankrupt. He had moved to a smaller city. He had taken a job under someone else's name, still trying to rewrite the narrative. But the world didn't care anymore. Because villains without an audience are just men with excuses. And I wasn't playing his stage manager anymore. I went to bed early that night. No anxiety. No countdowns. No alternate futures playing in my mind. Just silence. Soft. Sacred. Earned. The next morning, I opened my laptop to finalize the final pages of my book. Title * The Wedding That Freed Me. Subtitle * What happens when the bride walks out and builds an empire instead. The pre-orders had already surpassed expectations. But that wasn't the win. The real win was in the woman who wrote it. Unashamed. Unapologetic. Unattached to anything but her truth. Because the best revenge is not proving them wrong. It's living a life they can never touch again. I closed the document and looked out the window. The sun was rising. And this time, I wasn't walking toward a man waiting at the altar. I was walking toward myself.